Right, so the aid blockade of Gaza had gone on for long enough. The Houthis of Yemen gave Israel 4 days to lift that blockade, a violation of the now defunct Gaza ceasefire as that was, or they would renew their blockade of Israeli shipping on the Red Sea and surrounding waters. Only Israeli shipping. As it happens, despite that declaration, no such shipping actually tried it on. There were no ships for the Houthis to actually stop. Cue, however, the big orange man baby presiding over the United States, though, to take that warning and decide to act on it himself regardless, with other nations such as the UK playing lapdog in that, and launch a massive assault on Yemen. What did they achieve? Much the same as Israel has in Gaza overnight. Casualties mainly consisting of innocent civilians, not the Houthis, because the West lacks intelligence on Houthi movements and Houthi targets. But while the Houthis had made an announcement of intent against Israeli shipping, merely symbolic as that had actually turned out to be, no such targeting of US assets in the area had been made until Trump decided to paint one on his own shipping. A disproportionate and unprovoked response from the United States, which launched a series of airstrikes on Yemen, targeting civilian infrastructure and killing dozens, was never going to go unanswered. The Houthis just aren't built that way. Completely undeterred, they retaliated with precision strikes on US warships, most notably the USS Harry S. Truman, once more, signalling their resolve to meet escalation with escalation, and there is no US target too big for them to have a go at. And in their case, at least, they knew exactly where to strike. Right, so the US decision to launch airstrikes on Yemen was not only disproportionate, but also utterly, completely, strategically, and in a historical sense as well, absolutely stupid. But then this order came from Donald Trump. The Houthis, or Ansarallah, had announced their intention to blockade Israeli shipping in the Red Sea as a form of solidarity with the people of Gaza, who have been subjected to a criminal blockade of aid into the Strip in violation of the Gaza ceasefire agreement. Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi had given Israel 4 days to lift it, or they would resume the blockade of Israeli shipping. That said, though, even after the 4 days expired and the Houthis pledged to make good on their word, they had not actually stopped any shipping at the time of the subsequent US-led attack on them. The US airstrikes, which targeted civilian infrastructure in Sana'a and other parts of Yemen, were carried out despite a glaring lack of intelligence on the whereabouts of Houthi leadership and military assets. The US and its allies were effectively firing blind, therefore, attacking as they have before, with little care actually given to the impact their strikes would have on the ground, where they actually struck, who would actually be struck in these attacks, and an investigation into the criminality of those strikes absolutely needs to be carried out, because the Houthis were once again largely left completely operational, whilst dozens of civilians, mostly women and children, were killed in those attacks. What makes the likes of the US and UK forces any better than Israel and Gaza in relation to these attacks, then? Not much, in my view. The strikes also targeted critical infrastructure, further exacerbating the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Yemen, which has already been described as the worst in the world by the United Nations. The US-led airstrikes killed at least 53 people across 47 separate airstrikes, and injured dozens more. Many of the victims were civilians who had no connection to the Houthi movement or its military operations whatsoever. Amongst the targets that were hit in these airstrikes, and as an underlining of the fact these were not Houthi targets at all, American fighter jets apparently bombed a medicine warehouse and a cancer centre in Yemen amidst ongoing assault. There were also reports of the US airstrikes indiscriminately striking civilian targets across northern Yemen, particularly in its capital city of Sana'a, where the electrical grid was repeatedly struck, again a civilian target. Alan, you're going to knock the power out to Yemen now, are you? Much like Israel have knocked the power out to the Gaza Strip. It's not for the first time either that grid has been aimed for either. When speaking about the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, though, it's easy to blame the Houthis for this perhaps, but hold that thought. The US has long been complicit in the suffering of the Yemeni people, primarily through its support for the Saudi-led coalition, which had been waging a brutal war in Yemen since 2015, instigated by the Yemeni president in the face of the Houthis insurgents there. That failed. The Houthis are entrenched. The Saudis gave up and went home, unable to beat them. The recent US airstrikes, therefore, represent a continuation of this same pattern of violence, but to no greater avail, with the US once again prioritising its own interests over the lives of Yemeni civilians, its interests being tied up with that of Israel. It might have been all about the Houthis once upon a time, but they weren't the ones being targeted in these indiscriminate airstrikes. They have been the ones standing up for international law and Gazan solidarity, while the US and the UK kiss Netanyahu's backside as he commits genocide. But the thing with the Houthis, whatever you think about how they rose to power in Yemen, their prominence there now and their prioritisation of standing by Gaza over their own needs, so often they are still supported in the streets by the people of Yemen. And they simply won't let a thing like this go. The Houthis' response to the US-led airstrikes was swift and decisive, and they knew exactly what they were going to hit. Because in a series of carefully coordinated attacks, they targeted US warships in the Red Sea, most notably the USS Harry S. Truman, a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, the biggest, most powerful ship out there right now. And this isn't even the first time the Houthis have gone after it. Following those 47 airstrikes by the US, or US-led, unprovoked as they were, let's not forget that the Houthis hadn't yet targeted any shipping. I'll reiterate that point. None of the shipping they said they were going to target, Israeli shipping, had been targeted because there hadn't been any. But the Houthis then launched 3 separate strikes on the Truman within a 24-hour period with cruise missiles, ballistic missiles and drones, demonstrating their ability to challenge US military dominance in their region, on their own turf as it is. As is typical of the Houthis, though, they've issued several statements between their attacks. The latest, which came this morning, read, "Over the past few hours, the Yemeni armed forces have successfully targeted the US aircraft carrier USS Harry S. Truman in the northern Red Sea with 2 cruise missiles and 2 drones, and targeted a US destroyer with a cruise missile and 4 drones. The targeting of the aircraft carrier is the 3rd in the past 48 hours. The enemy was struck by a state of confusion which prompted many of its warships to retreat towards the northern Red Sea region, and an air attack that was being prepared against our country was thwarted." This, of course, followed those 2 earlier and actually larger attacks on the warship and its accompanying vessels. The Houthis have pledged to meet escalation with escalation, and they have the military capability to back up this threat, which is still underestimated by the likes of the US. Their capabilities, despite being one of the poorest nations on earth, to target a US aircraft carrier, one of the most heavily defended and armed military assets in the US military arsenal, is a testament to their growing sophistication and their resolve. It also underscores the futility of the US's strategy of using military force to try and achieve its objectives, I should say, versus the Houthis. Now, of course, the US has long accused Iran of supporting the Houthis in all of this, both financially and militarily, and this is how they are able to do such things, and this is a narrative that has been amplified in the wake of the recent escalation. The toxic tangerine that is Trump himself got a bit vocal over on Truth Social about all of this. You can imagine him stamping his tiny feet and balling up his tiny hands in fury as he furiously typed out his response, which read, "Let nobody be fooled. The hundreds of attacks being made by Houthi, the sinister mobsters and thugs based in Yemen, who are hated by the Yemeni people, all emanate from and are created by Iran. Any further attacks or retaliation by the Houthis will be met with great force, and there is no guarantee that force will stop there. Iran has played the innocent victim of rogue terrorists from which they've lost control, but they haven't lost control. They're dictating every move, giving them the weapons, supplying them with money and highly sophisticated military equipment, and even so-called intelligence. Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran, and Iran will be held responsible and suffer the consequences, and those consequences will be dire." Well, if Trump wants to go to war with Iran on such claims, that he can bin his claims to be someone who ends wars and doesn't start them, because I think it's rapidly becoming clear that Trump is quite happy being yet another warmongering US president. Iran, for its part, has denied any involvement in the Houthi attacks and has warned the US against further escalation. The head of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, Hossein Salami, vowed a devastating response to any US or Israeli attack on Iran. This warning reflects Iran's growing frustration, of course, with always getting the blame for everything from the US, the boogeyman as they are so often made out to be, and ultimately does nothing to reduce the risk of a broader regional conflict. If Iran and the US do end up taking lumps out of each other in due course, things will get a whole lot worse. The US's decision to launch airstrikes on Yemen, despite the lack of a clear justification, reflects that pro-Israel broader strategy of using military force to assert dominance in the region. But it has never worked against the Houthis before, and not many are going to think it's going to change going forwards either. This strategy has repeatedly failed to achieve its objectives. The Houthi retaliation, particularly the strikes on the USS Harry S. Truman, represent a significant challenge to US military dominance in the region, and the arrogance of the likes of Trump and his hangers-on, still acting in a manner of, who do these people think they are to stop us, kind of underlines that. But also their continued underestimation of Houthi determination and capability. The recent escalation in Yemen is a tragedy, and instead of winning condemnation against the Houthis, it will have more people sympathising with them and against the pro-Israeli atrocities committed by Western forces, even amongst people living in the West. The idiot Trump brought Houthi attacks down on himself. He's achieved nothing except to lose more support for his pro-Israel stance and a bill for the damage done to his shipping. What an embarrassment he is. Meanwhile, Trump has attempted to move on with his Gaza deportation plans as well. He was hoping, finding new locations to send the 2 million people of Gaza somewhere else, looking at East Africa this time as it happened. Well, it didn't work out too well for him. Little wonder, I suppose, he greenlit Israel to break the Gaza ceasefire officially overnight, the madman. But if you want another laugh at another Trump fail, check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you have not already done so you don't miss out on all new content published daily, as well as supporting the channel at the same time, which is enormously appreciated. Fewer than 300 subscribers away from the 100,000 subs mark, as this channel now is, so do please consider it, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.